current exhibitions. We invite you to take time to visit MOCA North Miami to see them in person. They're really wonderful, and having the curator with us today is very exciting to really get into these conversations. Before proceeding, MOCA acknowledges that we stand on the current and ancestral home of the Seminole and Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. We further acknowledge the Calusa, Yaega, Miami, and Tequesta peoples, all historic caretakers of this land. We honor and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of Southern Florida. Funding for this program was provided through a grant from Florida Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the Florida Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional support was provided by City National Bank. I'd take a moment to introduce all three of our wonderful folks speaking tonight. Erica Moiah James is an art historian, curator, and assistant professor at the University of Miami. Her research and writing centers on indigenous, modern, and contemporary art of the Caribbean and African diaspora. Before arriving in Miami, she was the founding director and chief curator of the National Gallery of the Bahamas, a jointly appointed assistant professor in the departments of the History of Art and African American Studies at Yale University, and director of undergraduate studies in the Department of African American Studies at Yale. James is a 2019 to 2022 research associate at the Visual Identities in Art and Design Research Center in the University of Johannesburg, a 2020 recipient of the Creative Time / Warhol Foundation Writers Grant, and a 2020 Mellon Foundation Project Grant focused on the multimodal art practices of Jeffrey Holder. Her forthcoming book is entitled After Caliban, Caribbean Art and the Global Imaginary. Melvin L. Butler is an associate professor of musicology at the University of Miami, a scholar performer with broad interests in music and religion of the African diaspora. He has conducted field research on popular music and religion in Haitian and Jamaican communities. In these transnational Caribbean contexts, he interrogates the cultural politics of musical style and religious expression, while attending to the role of musical performance in constructing individual and collective identities. His first book, Island Gospel, Pentecostal Music and the Identity in Jamaica and the United States, explores the theological and experiential connections between Jamaican and African gospel performance. His current research and writing interests center on music, ritual, and transcendence in Haiti, along with discourse of cultural authenticity and power that inflects spiritual practice. At the heart of his work lies a critical reconsideration of how music and the expressive arts relate to the process of boundary crossing, identity formation, and social positioning in post-colonial contexts. His second book manuscript, Claiming Haiti, Music and the Cultural Politics of Transcendence, is under contract with Oxford University Press. And last but not least, Nadege Green is an independent researcher, writer, and audio producer based in Miami. She is the founder of Black Miami-Dade, a history and storytelling platform that resists the erasure of Miami's Black past. Her practice and approach to storytelling is deeply rooted in history and first-person narratives that explore and connect issues around race, culture, climate justice, and displacement. Green's reporting has appeared on NPR, WLRN Radio, Marketplace, Public Radio International's The World, and in the Miami Herald and The Atlantic. She is the editor of the community anthology, More Than What Happened, The Aftermath of Gun Violence in Miami. Green was the inaugural scholar in residence at the University of Miami Center for Global Black Studies, and she was most recently a scholar in residence at the New York University's Center of Black Visual Culture. A child of Haitian immigrants and former farm workers, she was born and raised in the county of Dade. Thank you all, and with that introduction, please.
Okay, I will start. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see this? Okay, So one of the best things about developing this exhibition were the conversations Didier and I had as we were dreaming up the show. And we realized at some point that we wanted the exhibition to catalyze various public conversations generated or dealt with in his practice in relation to Haiti. And we didn't want to just focus these conversations on abjection, devastation, loss, migration to flee, but we wanted to think about Haiti, what Haiti has contributed to the world. We wanted to think about its relationship and place in the history and our notions and understanding of the Americas and the Atlantic world in particular, what it has contributed to our understanding of politics, perhaps unbeknownst to ourselves, epistemologies, history, culture, identity, Blackness, and for me as an art historian, what we regard as modernism, particularly Caribbean modernism, and the ways in which one could, in a sense, map the activation or coalescing of the very notion of diaspora itself around the events of the Haitian Revolution. We chose to call this session North Star, partly because for many migrants, Haiti remains a kind of guidepost, no matter where one is in the world. And we wanted to start that conversation with this painting that you see on the screen. And it's pixelated a little bit, oh my goodness. And it's a painting that Didier completed towards the end of the period where we were choosing works for the exhibition. And it's a painting that's based on a series of photographs he took at the Atchafalaya Basin in Louisiana. Didier William has had a long fascination with Louisiana in particular, primarily because of its relationship with Haiti and our very understanding of the United States. In his words, the Louisiana Purchase, what we understand as the Louisiana Purchase, was one of history's greatest bargains. It was a chance for the United States to buy one of France's largest and wealthiest territories and eliminate the European threat in the process. But we should always remember that the actual transaction was fueled by the Haitian Revolution, right? France only became interested in parting with what became known as the American heartland, right? This was a part of America that was nowhere near in existence or a part of our understanding of America in 1776. But they became interested in selling it when it became necessary to recoup their losses from the Haitian Revolution itself. The very idea of France ceding any of its colonial territory before 1791, the beginning of the revolution, is absolutely unthinkable. They were not interested in it. The superpower had built a vast network of colonies in the Americas, really capitalizing on European taste for coffee and indigo and other commodities. And it was France was an extractive colonizer in the clearest sense of the term, right? Now, though important, coffee and indigo were not as valuable as sugar, which dominated the French colonial holdings. And Saint-Domingue, which is now known as Haiti, of course, had been transformed into the great sugar capital of the world. It was supplying the majority, one of the largest suppliers of sugar to Britain and France. And it was producing more than half of its coffee and all of these incredible things that we pay so much money for today. In a sense, it was capitalism perfected, and it was difficult to let go of that income. And cut off from it, it decided, we're going to just sell our claim and recoup our costs. This really means that the United States as we know it is impossible without the Haitian Revolution. And I don't think I'm overstating that in any way, right? In my work, increasingly, I found that the full story of American culture itself and Black American artistry as well needs to apply greater consideration on how Haiti and the revolution shaped its understanding of itself and American culture. One of the places directly shaped by Haitians and Haitian culture is, of course, New Orleans. The city, of course, was French, but at the beginning of the 19th century, it was reshaped through the prism of Haiti. The liberation of Haiti in 1804 did not immediately bring stability. And the years after the assassination of Dessalines saw a massive exodus of Haitians to New Orleans. But the Haitian presence in New Orleans after 1806, in a sense, reshaped the city. We know that the Haitian Revolution began in 1791, and at that point, more than half of that country's population had been born in Africa. Persons fleeing the revolution began arriving in New Orleans shortly after 1791. But right after the assassination in the years after the assassination of Dessalines, 50 ships brought 6,060 free Blacks, slaves, and whites from Haiti between May 10th and August 19, 1809. And in 1810, the New Orleans census said it had 12,225 people, half of which had immigrated the year before from Haiti. And of that number, there were more than 3,000 free persons of color. And in American racial terms at the time, the city consisted of about just under 8,000 Black people or Negroes and about 4,500 white people. New Orleans was a Black city with an appreciable number of Blacks that had been born in Africa and Haiti, right? This completely changed the shape of that city. That presence in the world, outside of Haiti, completely changed that city. One of the ways in which Haitians immediately contributed was in architecture and the building arts. They became some of the massive builders of the city. They introduced the shotgun style house to America. They became ironmongers, involved themselves, as I said, in architectural design, but most notably furniture design. Some of the finest examples of American furniture from this period were made by Haitians who had immigrated or migrated to New Orleans in that 1809 wave. Haitians were also participating to representational practices in the United States. How are Black people going to be represented? And one of the reasons that happened was because of the early introduction of the daguerreotype in Haiti itself. So when Haitians came to the United States, they brought those talents with them. Deborah Willis has noted that by the 1840s, more than 50 Black daguerreotypists, the earliest version of photography, were operating in the United States at the time. And one of the most famous was a man of Haitian descent, an engraver who became a daguerreotypist by the name of Patrick H. Reason. Now, Reason was not born Reason. His birth name is Patrice Reason. It was a French name. And his family, we believe, came to the United States through New Orleans. They anglicized their names. And like many Haitians who arrived in New Orleans in 1806 to 1809, they kept moving. All of them didn't stay in New Orleans. They kept moving. And his family ended up in New York. What is important is what I want us to note, and we'll come back to this, is that what I keep finding when I'm researching these creatives is that even after they left Haiti, a lot of the creatives maintained an abolitionist stance. They became abolitionists in the United States, and in very important ways fueled and shaped that movement within the United States among African Americans, of which they were now considered a part of. Reason was a trained artist, as we can see, but his creative work, he believed, had to, in a sense, support his political position. As an abolitionist. He worked as an illustrator for many abolitionist publications and expressed a deep concern in particular for the rights of Black women, which of course I was over the moon to see in the 19th century. Here was this, this Black man really interested not only in the liberation of Black people, but specifically the liberation of Black women. In response to the abolitionist image, am I not a man and a brother, the very famous image, he created an engraving on behalf of women that asked, am I not a woman and a sister? And, this to me, that's a deeply moving position. But his most famous work is this engraving that we see on the screen. And it's an engraving of the Black abolitionist and author of the book, The American Slave, Henry Bibb. And it's an engraving that's based on a daguerreotype. We believe that he took a photograph that he took. The clarity and detail of the engraving is really quite extraordinary, right? And it's unusual. It's unusual in some ways before the advent of daguerreotypes to have this degree of detail. So all of these gentlemen that you see, Patrick Reason and Henry Bibb, were all openly supported abolition in America, even though the United States was still a very much supported slavery, transatlantic slavery. And their activities, though far away from Haiti, often reached back, no doubt in both intended and unintended ways. There are so many interesting connections between these figures, these 19th century figures, that, at first you think of them independently, and then as you do more historical work, more archival work, you realize that this person knew that person, and it all circles back, as you will see, to Haiti once more. I don't believe that there are any accidents. And I think the 19th century, the events of the 19th century and the life of Haitians in America really, really prove this. Another place that became very important to Haitians abroad was Philadelphia. And it was a place that had a long history with Haiti, and it was a major site for immigration from Haiti from 1791 on. Peter Augustin arrived in the city in 1818 and from Haiti, and he bought a catering business by a man by the name of Robert Bogle, and he turned it into a dynasty. His children intermarried other Haitians coming to the city. They were very pointed in the fact that they would marry other Haitians. And that business lasted until Peter Albert, the man that you see on the screen, closed it in 1967. So think of it, 1818 to 1967, the most prominent caterers in the city of Philadelphia were of Haitian descent, right? And they catered to everyone, Black, white, everyone. He introduced various napkins, china, all of these sorts of really sort of fancy accoutrements, and he serviced the elite of Philadelphia and regular people as well. It was also a city very important for lithography and engraving, and was used quite a bit in the 19th century. Most of the known prints of Haitian leaders during the 19th century were produced in Philadelphia, and they were produced in Philadelphia by some of the most well-known lithographers and engravers in America at the time. So what we begin to see, this link with Haiti, is this how is Blackness represented in the 19th century? How do we present ourselves in portraiture? How do we in a sense narrate our own story by determining the ways in which we are represented in a public sphere? Now, I will return, I'll return to this story in a moment, but I'm going to take a little circuitous route right now. So in my own work, I'm deeply interested in all of this, but I'm very much interested in the way that the Caribbean enunciates and takes up space in the world more generally. And I'm fascinated by the ways in which Haiti has become a part of key eruptions in Black political life and creative life in the world itself, and the way it has played a key role in articulating our understanding of Black diaspora, our very notion of a Black diaspora. Now, for me, and many Haitians may say, no, the revolution was not just a Haitian event. Right? Once you start researching African diasporic history, you realize that the Haitian Revolution was not just a Haitian event. It was a global Black diasporic event. And we see African Americans elevating Louverture and Haiti very early on from the beginning. This new text by Leslie Alexander describes it as Haiti becoming a part of the common destiny of Blacks throughout the world. It became this sort of linchpin that, that freedom, that claim to freedom is what we all need to aspire to in the United States and across the world. So, and I've also discussed in my other work the ways in which other things like the Negro Exposition in New Orleans in the 1880s, that was part of the World Industrial Cotton Exposition, held ironically in Audubon Park, was dedicated to Haiti. It was dedicated to Haiti, and all of the states, African Americans from across the United States, made work that honored the Haitian Revolution and noted their support of the country, the free sovereign state of Haiti. I also am interested in the ways in which African Americans left the United States to assist in building the country. Once again, Haiti is our common destiny. And in the 19th century, there were waves of African Americans, from Christophe on, inviting African Americans to come to Haiti to build the country. And some African Americans took that very seriously. We know about Prince Saunders, but there were also people like James Theodore Hawley, who took his entire Episcopal congregation from New Haven, Connecticut, 110 people in total. I think his church was St. Luke Church. And they left for Haiti in 1861 because he did not believe, after the Dred Scott decision, after the Fugitive Act, after all of these legislation were passing in the United States, that the U.S. would ever be a country that allowed Black people to be and claim the kind of freedom that was possible within Haiti. What is interesting to me is that in researching James Theodore Hawley, who does James Theodore Hawley link with? Right back to Patrick Reason and Henry Bibb. He meets them in Canada, of all places, and they connect. So he knew quite a bit about Haiti before he left for Haiti. He had already he knew Haitians in America. And it's just really interesting that, years later, here he was, and, using Haiti as his promised land. And the fact that he would be able to bring his entire his entire congregation with him, I think is really quite amazing. So the Haiti in the Caribbean and in the world is central, at least in my work, to a rethinking of what I refer to as Caribbean modernism. I'm an art historian. Art centers my life, and I believe it has a very important role to play in how we see the world. And what I refer to as Caribbean modernism is, it doesn't have these sort of fixed temporal and spatial dimension. It has, and it does occupy space in these space and times, but I also think of it as a kind of ethos, a kind of profound humanist politics, I would say, a kind of expressive action that is generated through multiple forms wherever its people are. Now, my interests center on how it catalyzes through the fine arts, particularly performance, literature, visual arts, and performance, and increasingly dance, and also in formal and informal institutions. And recently, I've turned my attention to Haitian and African creative communities that coalesced in Paris from the 1920s on, but more specifically, what was happening in Paris in the late 1950s through to around the early 1970s. Now, for me, I am, of course, interested in the Presence Africaine community, but specifically the work of the painter Hervé Telemaque that you see on the screen, and the Haitian actress, singer, and force of nature, Toto Bissant. Now, though I did not know I was introduced to Bissant work before Telemaque, and though I had the pleasure of getting to know Telemaque personally, and I never got the chance to meet Bissant, Bissant has become a source of great interest for me in my work. She arrived in France in the 1950s, and Hervé Telemaque followed her into France in the early 1960s. They were both compelled to stay in France as a result of the rise of the Valairism. But they never lost their rootedness and connection to Haiti. And in both instances, the culture of the island grounded their creative practice abroad. a few weeks, I asked Telemac's daughter whether he had known Toto Bissant in Paris, and her eyes like lit up. I had no idea. I'm like looking at these creatives individually, and here I'm at, his daughter was in town. A new exhibition of his work opened here in Miami. I was there, and I had met her before, and of course, and her eyes just lit up, and she said, I can't tell you whether daddy, my father knew her personally, but I can tell you that he lived and loved her music. And in fact, that at his homegoing service, which had been a few weeks before, he had insisted that Toto Bissant sing him home, right? That her music was the one that he needed them to use at his funeral to sing him home. And I want to play a little bit of this for you, just a little taste. I'm not the musicologist like Melvin, but Melvin, if you don't know Toto's music, you really, you need to know. So I'm going to play a little bit just for you to get her voice. This is called Papa Loco, and I will play.
Papa Loco, c'est bon, on pousse d'aller, c'est papillon à beauté, nouvelle bayaboué, et tout ça qui dit bien, j'aime la gueule. Et tout ça qui dit malo, j'aime la Papa Loco.
Her music is beautiful. I mean, her voice is beautiful. And she was, like I said, she was first and foremost Haitian wherever she was in the world. And her entire creative work was rooted in the culture of that space, in Vodun, in performance, in folklore, in history. And I came to know her not as a singer, but as an actor, right? And I immediately, I don't know, there was some, she looked like family. I don't know. She just looked like someone I would know. And at my earliest job, I used to program African American or Black international independent cinema from across the world. And I had the pleasure of programming two films. The first was Raoul Peck's Man by the Shore, and from the early 1990s. And the second was the film Black Girl by Ousmane Sembène, which is considered the beginning of African cinema. Now, what I would later find out is that Toto is in both of these, right? She's in both of these films. Ousmane Sembène, this is 1966, I'm sorry, not 1960. She's in this film, and she's also in, of course, the Raoul Peck's film. And it turns out that a colleague pointed this out to me, and of course we hear is her voice. She's never shown in Ousmane Sembène's film, but it's her voice. She voices the main character who never speaks herself. We just hear her voice, and it's Toto Bissant's voice, right? And when you listen to both films, you're like, of course, why didn't I, make this connection before? This is haunting me now. But her voice is present in both films. So this is the same voice, and how is it possible for me? Because I'm interested in things like this. That the first African feature film is voiced by a Haitian woman. Is this Haiti and the diaspora, or the work of the diaspora in the world? So alongside this geographic Caribbean space, how might we consider Sembène's work then as part of a more expansive notion of Caribbean modernism in the world? How do we look at Bissant's life and work, and how it might offer important pathways into reconsidering the borders and multimodal and global practices of our artists across the world, and the ways in which Caribbean modernism enunciates and Haitian modernism enunciates in these global spaces. So as I mentioned, she was a Haitian actress and singer who lived in Paris in the 1950s, returning on occasion to Haiti, always with a mind to someday returning permanently if conditions were right? And she eventually returns in 1986 and promptly, becomes involved with Raoul Peck's work. She lived in Paris for most of her adult life, though, and she was a singer and a musician. She was actively involved in Presence Africaine and the formation of the work of the first Black theater group in the city. It was an African diasporic theater group called the Griot, and she founded it with the Guadeloupean French filmmaker Sarah Maldoror and others, right? And you know, reminiscing on that time in 2016, the Ivorian filmmaker Timothy Basori talks about meeting her for the first time and meeting each other. They, you know, they're Black people coming from all over the world. They're coming to Haiti and they meet for the first time. And this is, I'm just going to read this really quickly. She said, I disembarked in Marseille on September 19th, 1956 from the line of the Banfora, which was making its last voyage before being scrapped. It was also the opening day of the first Congress of Black Writers and Artists in Paris, organized by Presence Africaine. But it is on September 20th that I arrived in the French capital. Friends immediately led me to the Sorbonne, where this event was being held. It was there that I met over the next few days 3 young people as in love with the theater as myself. Ababacar Sam Makaram from Senegal, Toto Bissant from Haiti, and Sarah Maldador from Guadeloupe. It was the start of a long, great, and fruitful friendship, right? Now, if we think of Toto's movements and community as a kind of bibliographic map of Haiti or Haitian and Caribbean modernism in this sort of diasporic world, and we think of the spaces she created with these groups of creatives, the community she created, and what she created in multiple artistic modes as a singer, as a film and stage actress, I'm curious about what might emerge and how Haiti shapes, lives in, and occupies this really rich space. Her involvement with the Griot group gives you a sample of the range of exploration that they were interested in, the political voice of the group, and their belief in the work of theater at the time, the kind of work it could do, but also the global political solidarity among Black people, right? Common destiny, that we have a common political destiny. And if we just look at a brief examination of their oeuvre, the work that this theater group did, it really illuminates the kind of incredible Black spaces she helped to cultivate. So, you know, they did, they also performed at the World Festival of the Arts in Dakar, and they performed Amy Césaire's play, The Tragedy of King Christophe, right, in Dakar. And I think the woman on the right facing us is Toto. So while I was specifically interested in her connection to Ousmane Sembène, right? And like, how did they ever connect? And early African filmmaking, and the question of how Bissant came to narrate the title character in Black Girl, the answer came relatively easy once I understood the nature of this community. It just turned out that it was through her sister friend, Maldador, right, who met Sembène at what is now known as the Gerasimov Institute of Cinematography in Moscow, and reconnected with him in Paris and later Senegal. They all made work together, deeply rooted in their interests and experiences, and they invited each other to participate and help them give birth to these creative endeavors. Maldador, of course, did 3 films on Césaire. You know, they were interested in each other and each other's stories, and they believed that within diaspora, that the art could speak to a certain politics and freedom that they wanted to generate through the work. What we find here, I think, is a seemingly ordinary but extraordinary life lived relationally, I think, on a magnificent scale, and mapping the connective tissues in all of these sort of interesting spaces where Haiti and Haitians come together with the rest of the world, I believe will really add to the richness of its story and impact, and expand our way of seeing Haiti that far exceeds the narrative that dominates even our evening news. So I'll end there and we can continue on. You can tell I'm kind of excited by this. This is new work, and I'm really excited by it. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James. I think it's my turn, and I'm just delighted to be here. First, I want to say thank you for the organizers for having us here, and thanks to the rest of the panelists here. I'm so inspired by what Erica James has shared with us, and there's so much in there. There's so much information that you've given us. So and so many jumping off points. I mean, I was taking a few notes, and I'm struck by your sentence, which I completely agree with, is that the United States as we know it would not be possible if it had not been for Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. And I would say the same thing, of course, about the popular music of the United States would not sound the same. It would not exist in its form without the presence of Haitians in the United States, without the Haitian Revolution, for example. So I think about this topic of diaspora and Haitians in the diaspora from this perspective, from several different perspectives, I suppose. One is my identity as an ethnomusicologist, that is someone who studies people making music, both in the modern day, but also historically. So as a historian, a quasi-historian of musical practices, and an ethnomusicologist, also as a musician. I first encountered Haiti, or Haiti first encountered me, when I lived in Boston as a college student. I'm not from Haiti. I don't have Haitian ancestry that I have clearly identified, although I'd like to say something else about that in a moment. But I was born in Kansas City. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, and grew up in Kansas City. But when I left in 1988 to go to the East Coast, I was suddenly made aware that there was this rich Haitian diaspora. And then in the early 1990s, when I moved to New York City and had the opportunity to work as a saxophone player in the horn sections of compa bands such as Phantom and Tabu Combo, and traveled to Haiti for the first time in 1994. That set me on a path to becoming a scholar, someone who would later go on to do research in Haiti and throughout its diaspora. And then also, as an African-American man, thinking about the connections of Black people around the diaspora throughout our history. I think Haiti and the United States, Haiti and African America in particularly are inextricably connected in so many reasons. And my own family background, as I just alluded to, as is the case for so many African Americans, is murky, right? And in recent years, we started to trace back, where did we come from? And we know that there's a plantation in Mississippi somewhere on my father's side. And on my mother's side, we come from Louisiana. And we discovered that there's this French sounding name. I think it's something like Deloche or something like that. But we don't know beyond that, And so for me, it's really fun to kind of speculate about how we got to the United States, how we eventually moved westward to Oklahoma and then to Kansas, the place of my birth. And for me, traveling to the East Coast and then eventually to the Caribbean to do research feels a little bit like a kind of spiritual homecoming or rounding the circle or something. And I can only speculate, but I think things happen for a reason. And I love to try to tie together all of these approaches that I bring to bear on this topic: scholar, African-American, and musician, one who sort of lives and kind of embodies what it means to be a performer of Black music, Black American music, but Black music that has ties, I think, throughout the African diaspora. Now, when I start to think about the history of jazz, and I won't be before you long, as sometimes your preachers say in a lot of Black churches, I'm also reminded of another thing that Dr. James highlighted, and this is, I think, if I'm paraphrasing correctly, the fact that the Caribbean enunciates itself in the United States and around the world. And I just love that turn of phrase, because everywhere I look, I see the Caribbean, and more specifically Haiti, enunciating itself. This happens in some ways that are transcribable and identifiable from a historical standpoint. We often think about the history of jazz, for example, as starting in New Orleans, Louisiana, the birthplace of jazz. And I think it's wise to avoid simplistic unilinear narratives of jazz's development. But we know that New Orleans was significant. And we know, for example, that Jelly Roll Morton, whose real last name was Lamotte, he changed it, right? He had a Haitian father and a French Creole mother. We know that Sidney Bechet, another one of the grand figures of African-American jazz, also had Haitian ancestry. But this is not the kind of thing that we're taught in our traditional jazz history courses. I never learned this in school. And so, a wonderful resource, actually, so there are the Jelly Roll Morton Smithsonian recordings that I think Alan Lomax recorded all in 1938. There's this beautiful box set of recordings where Jelly Roll Morton is sitting at the piano and talking about jazz and demonstrating what he calls the Spanish tinge, which it makes a lot of sense to me that Spanish tinge is probably better thought of as a Haitian tinge. He talks about, for example, the tresillo or the triolet rhythm, which sounds something like, and he plays an example of his 1923 composition, New Orleans Blues, that features that rhythm, right? And those of you that know compa or any variety of Caribbean popular music might recognize that as one of the primary rhythmic figures. It's in jazz, it's in popular music of Haiti. It's part of a family or a constellation of musical practices that tie us together. Musical practices that are that have resemblance, but nevertheless take on the distinctive characteristics of particular cultural contexts, that wear the perfume of their sort of local environment, while nevertheless, bearing sort of a broader similarity to other practices as well. These things fascinate me. Playing these kinds of musics fascinate me. Playing Haitian compa, Haitian dance music, and playing jazz. These things fascinate me as a musician. But again, thinking historically, I think about the history of jazz. I think about the connections in the Harlem Renaissance, which coincides with the U.S. occupation of Haiti, and the connection between figures like Zora Neale Hurston, who traveled to Haiti and wrote a couple of books in the 1930s based on her ethnographic research there, or County Cullen or Langston Hughes, who traveled to Haiti and saw Haiti as this inspiration for a kind of Black pride. So, and I think Dr. James alluded to these things as well. And these things are deeply meaningful, and they intersect with my interest in music. And it prompts me to think about expressive culture as a broader way to conceptualize all of these forms of performance that also, as Dr. James said, are deeply tied to a kind of political stance, the creative work and political stance, the politics of performance, if you will. Which I think applies not only to things like jazz and forms of popular music, but also religious music, a kind of spiritual orientation or an orientation to music making, an understanding that what we do with our voices and our bodies, it can be a way of inviting spiritual manifestations. It can be a way of resisting, of speaking truth to power, of asserting a Blackness that is defiant in the face of white supremacy and racism, despite efforts to squash it. Right, and I see this as a kind of connective tissue between the musics of the Haitian diaspora, the musics of African Americans, the musics of Black peoples throughout the world, but particularly in this context of Haiti and the United States. And I also see it as part of the connective tissue. It's one of the ways that we can talk about the kinds of similarities or expressive potentials of visual art, for example, various forms of material culture, and the more slippery, sometimes non-material forms of musical expression that we can't necessarily transcribe, right? The ritual practices, if you will. I was reminded also, as Dr. James was saying, and I'll kind of wrap up and turn it over to the next speakers, the architect Benjamin Latrobe, who was an Anglo-American who migrated to Virginia in the late 1700s, but ended up writing or creating all of these illustrations of Congo Square. And so because of some of those illustrations, we know what some of the instruments look like, the drums and the stringed instruments and whatnot. And so, and we have depictions of dances and things. So we know that music was not meaningful as sound all by itself. And perhaps this is true of all music, but that it's intimately connected to the body, to the sort of functions that it plays in our society, what we do with it. And so musical practices accrue meaning over time. And this is true, I think, when we look back historically. And it also helps me understand how the past relates to the present and how we, in 2022, bring forward these memories, these historical consciousness, this kind of historical consciousness, if you will. It's been almost exactly 10 years since Jacqueline Charles wrote in the Miami Herald, and I'll quote her. She says, "If New Orleans is the city where jazz was born, then Haiti is the place where it is being reborn, but with a distinct Caribbean flavor. Called Creole jazz, it often joins traditional Vodou rhythms, conga drums, and classical jazz chords." And she wrote that on January 17th, 2013. I just sort of realized that it's been a decade since she wrote that. And it reminds me of the work of, just some fantastic musicians, jazz musicians of Caribbean descent, who in the present day are continuing to sort of draw on their heritage and complicate, I think, traditional notions of what jazz even is, or maybe there's even a better term. Or I think sometimes we, not only in the academic community, but I think in the broader public, may have an overly narrow conception of that term, what it means. But Etienne Charles is one such person. There's Godwin Louis. There's Jean Caz here in Miami. All of these musicians are incredible, and they're Haitianizing a jazz that was already perhaps Haitianized. So I think I'll stop there and turn it over to Dr. Nadege Green. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the question and answer session.
I will take the honorary PhD, but I do not have one of those. But I'll take it as an honorary. So I'm Nadege Green. I was born and raised here in Miami, and both of my parents are Haitian. They were farm workers here in Miami, as most immigrants in Miami come here to do the jobs that we take. So I've gotten to see sort of the growth and am part of that growth of Miami's Haitian community. I am, the first generation born in the US, right? My family was born, both mom and dad were born in Haiti. I used to joke that I didn't know I was growing up in the US because at home, it was very Haitian. It's not until I went to school, I realized, okay, this is America. Because, at home we're eating whatever, liver, boiled plantain for breakfast, it was only Creole spoken at home. We went to a Haitian church. We lived in Little Haiti. So, it was very Haitian. Everyone was Haitian, So in my research, I've been a journalist in Miami for over 12 years, and I also do independent research around historical work, which is why I started Black Miami-Dade, because I feel like our diasporic Blackness in Miami often gets flattened because people don't know what to do with Black people from different places, and so it gets flattened very easily. And so I love picking apart the layers of what Black looks like in Miami. And one of the things in some of the research I've been working on is the Haitian presence in Miami before Haitian migration, right? Before the Haitian boat crisis, as it was called, in the mid-70s through the 80s. But there were always Haitians in Miami. In the early 1800s, there is a gentleman, his last name on the immigration paperwork was Francis, but his son tells it that his last name was actually Francois. And so, as you were just mentioning, Dr. James, the Englishification, right, of people's names. I know that's not a word, but Americanizing the names. And the immigration officer was like, well, in the US, you can't be Francois, you're Francis. And so the family's lineage is Francis, but dad was actually born in Haiti and was a shoemaker in Haiti and learned, the skill of a shoemaker and apparently was a Vaudouisan as well. And so when he moved to Miami, a part of how he made money was offering his services as a Vodou practitioner to the folks in the community. And so we know that even in early Miami, we're talking about late 1800s, early 1900s, there was Vodou in Overtown, so much so that some of the African Americans would complain because, Haitians, everywhere we go, there we are. And, people were existing and they were practicing their culture out loud here in Miami in the late 1800s and 1900s. And I thought, one of the cool things you said, Dr. James, because you brought up James Theodore Holly, his son, Alonzo Holly, lived here in Miami. So Alonzo Holly was born in Haiti, but he moved back here and was a huge part of the Marcus Garvey movement here. He was an active member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association Miami chapter. And he would give these long speeches about the Haitian Revolution and, was, of course, again, when we talk about Blackness and centering our Blackness and what it means to resist colonialism, what it means to resist our kidnapping, the trafficking of Black folks, he absolutely uplifted the Haitian Revolution in the streets of Obertown here in Miami, which is now a historic Black neighborhood, but it's always been a diasporic, international Black space, not just African American, but Miami was also founded by Bahamians. And so, but you also had Haitians here. And Alonzo Holly, though technically is of American descent, but he called Haiti his country. And after the US occupation in 1915 in Haiti, Alonzo Holly wrote W.E.B. Du Bois from his home in Miami. And in the letter, he professes like his deep love for Haiti. And he's asking Du Bois, he's trying to get Du Bois to like lecture around like what is happening in Haiti right now with the Marine occupation. He goes into details about how the US invasion is repressing the Haitian press, how newspapers are being obliterated, and the violence that's being unleashed on Haitians in the US. And at one point in the letter, he says, like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he was like, I love my country. And he goes, please help my country, right, to W.E.B. Du Bois. And so we had this conversation between, one of the leading thinkers of the time of who is African American with, someone who is deeply in love with Haiti, and we're talking about 1916 in Miami. And so I know the narrative around Haitians in Miami typically starts at the Haitian refugee crisis, which I'm like, was it a crisis though? Who gets to name what's a crisis, right? And so I just wanted to anchor us in that. I'm still doing some deep dive research around that, because I think like right now we're celebrating or acknowledging and celebrating like 50 years is how it's being termed, 50 years of Haitian presence in Miami. And that's not quite accurate. So it's 50 years since the Haitian boat arrivals, right? Which set off the largest wave of Black migration in the US. Before Haitian migration in the 1970s through the 80s, the US has never seen this type of Black migration to the US. And so we're acknowledging 50 years of that migration. However, it's important to know that way before that, you had Haitians here. In fact, Mr. Francis, who I referenced earlier, was vice president of the UNIA. So the Garveyite movement in Miami was largely led by folks of Caribbean descent. And so it was mostly Bahamians, and apparently we know there were some Haitians in the mix, so much so that the vice president of the Garveyite movement here in Miami in the early 1900s was born in Haiti. And so I think it's important, again, that, when we consider like what that presence looks like, also in the early 1900s in Miami, we knew Haitians were here because there is documentation around the maypole dances that would happen for January 1st, Haitian Independence Day. It's called maypole dance in English. and Creole, we call it tresser riban, where you take the ribbons and you kind of run underneath them, and like they make like a beautiful braiding, which is very much like of European tradition. But, as enslavement goes, you learn some of this. But some folks are saying also, I have read that some folks contest that and say that this is also a tradition that's just rooted in Blackness as well, which is very possible the two could exist together. But you also had Haitian art form happening here in the early 1900s. I will say though, anchoring us back now to like the wave of Haitian migration that kicks off in the 1970s here, that a result of that was also Haitian art, like flooded Miami in the most beautiful of ways. Because when we talk about exile and who got exiled, right? Who speaks out when things goes wrong, right? Like who are the people who voice movements? It is always artists. It is always artists. And because of that, artists are the first ones out or kicked out, because, you can't have this type of singing, right? You can't have this sort of lyricism. We can't have you putting on these kind of plays, because Black art has always been movement art. It's not something that just all of a sudden showed up. Black folks have always resisted with art, existed with art, and had conversations in that way. And so one of the things that we saw as a result of the Duvalier era, and that wave of Haitian migration to Miami was Haitian artists to Miami. And we're talking about national dancers, traditional Haitian folklore dancers. We're talking about the singers. We're talking about the drummers. Like all of these beautiful artists from Haiti ended up here in Miami and absolutely added layers to Miami's music scene, dance scene. As a young person, I remember learning Haitian folklore dances with Société Coucouille, which was one of like the dance companies that they set up and had their own salons in Little Haiti. And so like I learned Jean Valou, and we would go and we would perform. And it was a really beautiful way also, like I joke about not knowing I was in the US, but it's also a note on how rich the culture was, and how true that people stayed to the culture so that they were imparting that culture on to the American-born children who were here, which over time does eventually get lost, right? But we were getting taught by Haitian masters, right? Like the Haitian dance teachers, master dance teachers who trained with Catherine Dunham, who created, their own sense of movement. And so I had the absolute pleasure of like having a first, like I had front row seat to that, right? My parents were also active in VEO, which was a Haitian immigrant rights group here, led by Father Gérard Jean-Gist. Gérard Jean-Gist is one of my favorite humans in Miami Haitian history, because he was such a badass. I'm sorry, y'all could bleep that out. But he was a priest who the archdiocese would not let practice because he was so radical. And in fact, the Archdiocese of Miami, when people would hauntingly wash up ashore, having made it here but not have made the journey alive, Father Jean-Gist would insist on a proper burial for them. The Archdiocese was very much of the mindset that if we don't know if they're Catholic or not, so if they're not Catholic, we can't bury them. And Father Jean-Gist was like, I'm burying them, and did. And one of the interesting things, around like Haitian migration in Miami, that we always talk about the diaspora wars and the tensions between African Americans and Haitians, but there was so much solidarity that isn't talked about. And so when you had folks coming in, and their loved ones did not make it alive, it was an African American funeral home, the Poitier Funeral Home, who would bury them for no cost. And made sure, because if you're Black, you understand that we have to bury our dead, and we have to bury our dead with dignity. And so it was an African-American funeral home who made sure that our deep and rich traditions around how we honor our dead carries through, even if their families were not here to do it, that they would have a proper burial. Same thing with the Chrome Detention Center. You had so many people were imprisoned, right, for daring to seek asylum, for daring to seek a safe space in the cradling arms of the US. And you had African-American DJs from Liberty City who would set up their huge speakers outside the Chrome Detention Center and play music. And so that if you were on the inside, you could hear music. And, they always had like the dopest, like big, this is sound system days, right? Set up in Liberty City in the African Square Park. But they were like, yo, those are our brothers. So we gotta, like at least play them something. And so they would go out and set up their sound system to play for the Haitian migrants. Again, when we talk about the ways that we come together, I think the arts are so central to that, right? That music is such an important part. And so healing that in that moment, you probably, all you heard were bars clanging and people weeping. And like for a moment, right, you have like this burst of music, right? And I want to think that it was like the thump, 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 like bass, but like that was available. And so you had all of the solidarity. Even Gene Tenney, who is a prolific artist here in Miami, talks about being inspired by the Haitian woodworkers who came to Miami, right? And learning from them. And he's an African-American man. And so there was always like this cross-cultural exchange of ideas that was happening at that time that really isn't documented in popular press or how we talk about like migration to Miami and the role of how we exist with one another, I think made more apparent are the tensions, which are real, which are not make-believe, but lost in that are also the layers of joy, the layers of solidarity. It was the NAACP that stood together with Haitian migrants to stand against this unequal immigration system that saw white Cubans be able to be treated differently than the Black immigrants who were coming, right? It was Jesse Jackson who was here. And so you had all of these ways. In fact, one of my favorite stories around resistance, around solidarity, around African-American and Haitians resisting was a Winn-Dixie that was located on 54th Street in Little Haiti. And at this Winn-Dixie, a security guard was interviewed, I believe by the Sun Sentinel or Broward newspaper, around these new arrivals, right? And he said some very pejorative things, epithets, and also said something like around Haitians smell bad, like they need to wear deodorant or something. So this was published up in Broward. No one in Miami would have seen it. The Miami Times, the largest African-American owned newspaper in the South, printed those comments. The Miami Times also had like a section around the Haitian arrival that was like Little Haiti Voices, where they were actually documenting what was happening in the Haitian community in a way that the Miami Herald was not. And so the Black newspaper was absolutely, the African-American newspaper was in the paint with Haitians. And again, this is not a narrative that is typically uplifted around Miami, but after they printed that, African-Americans and Haitians descended upon that Winn-Dixie and shut it down. And it was one of the larger protests that they had seen, so much so that they ended up removing the security officer. And I believe there was a Miami police officer who also said some pejorative things who was reassigned. But that was a collective movement of African-Americans and Haitians working together. And so when I think about like just the layers of Miami and how we come together and how we flow, it is absolutely the case that, you know, you see these beautiful moments throughout, like especially through the late 1970s, through the 90s, of solidarity, of movement building. And I want to note that historically, this has always been the case, right? Even in early Miami, when you had migration of Bahamians and African Americans, they were bumping heads then too, right? And they were building together, right? Like you can fight with your cousins and still love them, right? You can fight with your cousins and still be like, when it's time to fight, we all fighting, right? And I feel like that's a lot of like how it goes. And I feel like we've seen that in Miami a lot. Like we gonna fight with each other, but we're gonna fight together too, right? And we're gonna create beautiful things together, and we're going to make music together, and we're going to rock out together, and we're going to, you know, have fashion moments together, and we're going to make art together. We're going to call each other in. We're going to have drum circles together. Like all of these beautiful ways in which Black folks exist here, and the layers of how we exist here, in particular through food. Food is an art. And, you know, I feel like in Miami, you don't have to speak Creole to order in a Haitian restaurant anymore, right? Like, you know, all the food, all my American friends know the food in Creole. And in fact, so much so that non-Haitian restaurants now have pickles as a side dish in their restaurants, right? Like it's like ketchup. And so like just the ways that, you know, part of the culture just becomes part of the fabric of the place, but still remains part of the culture. But I'll just stop there. But I just wanted to uplift some of those narratives around Miami. Oh, and before I do stop, I did want to say around music, especially Melvin, because you talked about this. I remember during the height of detention, and also to note that the US detention system does not exist without Haitians. The US did not start detaining people en masse until Haitians started getting here. So the whole thing we're seeing on the border around detention was practiced and perfected on Haitians in Miami. And then it was outsourced to everywhere else. But that was not the policy before you saw this large wave of Black immigrants coming into the US. And then it became detention and deport. But one of the songs that came out, I have all of my dad's old records. He's no longer with us, but I have all of his old records. But one of them is by La Woz, who is a Haitian singer, but he had a song named Guantanamo, and it was about, you know, being detained in Guantanamo. And it's like, you know, just Guantanamo, Like it's a bop. But it's also a mourning, right? Like our folks are being detained. And here's where they're being detained. And then of course you had Mano Chalmai, who epic Haitian lyricist, musician, who eventually was exiled to Miami. He passed away here in Miami. And I remember at one point he was playing at Tap Tap. He would play regularly at the Tap Tap restaurant on Miami Beach. Mano was the soundtrack of resistance of the Duvalier era, like, period. He was the soundtrack for that, right? And I remember being at Tap Tap once and just listening to his music, and he's singing live, and there are these white tourists coming in and they have no idea who he is. They probably think he's just some guy, singing. And I'm like, this is an icon, right? He is a famous Haitian musician. And he was just so humble forever. And he was just there. But like, and so I just think of what you say about Melvin around music and the role that music plays, that even around protest songs and existence in Miami, we've seen that as well. So I'll stop and let the MOCA people come back maybe and take questions. I don't know. What do we do now?
The MOCA people are back. So thank you all for these and for really sharing your expertise and contextualizing everything that we've learned about today and putting us both in the past as well as here and now. I think these are the kind of conversations that I know moving from Mexico to Miami, I didn't get a chance to have until I started listening to like these kinds of outside educational conversations, right? It's very interesting the way the narrative is presented, right? So I really appreciate, we had one comment by our good friend of MOCA, Marie Charles, from the Green Family Foundation, who is so happy that we mentioned the Alan Lomax in Haiti box set that they helped to produce. I would recommend to any of our participants to visit the greenfamilyfoundation.org's website to see if you can purchase it, listen to it, really get into it, and kind of extend this beyond this conversation to take that sounds home with you. If we have any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the questions and answer now. But I think we were all just so succinct and so good. I was here in the seats like, wow, okay. So if that's everything, I think I would like to thank you all for joining us. Oh, we got a thank you from Danny. So thanks to everybody coming in. I would like to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have learned as much as I have. Oh, Hadassah, thank you so much. Thank you. Hadassah says thanks to us for your presentations, for your time. I would like to invite us to rejoin for our upcoming lineup of February programs. We will be holding MOCA Moving Images at Green Space in Miami, which is at the it's at the 7200 Biscayne Boulevard. So we have a whole setup. We're gonna have some popcorn, and we're gonna watch a screening of Malak Tropical, and we'll have a conversation with Arts for Learning Program Director Ivy Bennett and Haitian American filmmaker and artist Monica Sorrell.
When is that?
That's going to be February 1st at Green Space. So that's off-site. But on-site, we will, in February 15th, we will hold conversations at MOCA again. So it's going to be moderated by Dr. Jerry Philogene, and in conversation with three notable diasporic Haitians and some very dear friends, Michelle Lisa Polisson, Mark Floridor, and Morale Doucette. So they're going to be adding their voices to this conversation. Sally B says, Messi, excellent talk. So thank you all today. Hopes to see everybody at Green Space. We're very excited. And we will see you all soon. Thank you again for lending your voices.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody. Bye-bye.